I was helping my 8-year-old daughter Madison pack her clothes into garbage bags when my mother called from the living room that she needed the guest bedroom ready by tomorrow for the real grandchildren. Madison looked up at me with those big brown eyes, holding her stuffed elephant that had been missing an ear since she was 3, and asked why Grandma didn't want us to live there anymore. My parents had invited us to stay with them after my divorce, promised it would be temporary until I got back on my feet, but apparently temporary meant until my golden child sister Rebecca decided to move back to town with her perfect twin boys. "Pack faster, honey," I whispered, trying not to let her see my hands shaking as I folded her school clothes. 27 years of being the disappointment daughter, and now my kids were paying the price for my sister's sudden homecoming. My name is Valentina Torres, and I work the evening shift at Mercy General Hospital as a certified nursing assistant, helping patients with daily care and mobility between the hours of 3 and 11 p.m. The hallways smell like disinfectant and cafeteria food, fluorescent lights humming overhead as I move between rooms checking on people who need help getting to the bathroom or remembering to take their medication. Before the divorce, I lived in a 3-bedroom house on Elm Street with my ex-husband Carlos and our 2 kids, Madison, who's 8, and Tyler, who just turned 6 last month. The house had a backyard with a swing set Carlos installed the summer Tyler learned to walk, and a kitchen window that faced east so I could watch the sunrise while making school lunches. But Carlos kept the house in the divorce settlement, along with most of our savings and the good credit score. My parents' house on Riverside Drive has been the family gathering place for 30 years, where Christmas mornings happened and birthday parties filled the backyard with folding tables and paper tablecloths. Mom keeps photo albums on the coffee table showing 4 decades of family memories, and Dad's workshop in the garage still smells like sawdust from all the birdhouses he built when Rebecca and I were little. Moving back home at 32 felt like admitting failure, but my parents insisted it was temporary, just until I could save enough money for a security deposit and first month's rent somewhere decent. Madison and Tyler adjusted better than I expected, enjoying having grandparents around for homework help and bedtime stories. Tyler especially loved when Grandpa taught him how to use the manual screwdriver to fix loose drawer handles. Rebecca has always been the successful daughter, the one who married a lawyer and lives in Seattle with her twin boys, Marcus and Matthew. She sends Christmas cards with professional family photos and calls Mom every Sunday to update her on soccer games and piano recitals. Her boys are 10 years old, polite and well-behaved, the kind of grandchildren who say please and thank you without being reminded. When Rebecca announced she was moving back to town after her husband's job transfer, I should have known my temporary living arrangement was about to become very temporary indeed. If family drama like this sounds familiar, make sure you subscribe. We all have that one sibling who can do no wrong. The favoritism started early and never really stopped. Rebecca was the straight-A student who got into college on academic scholarships, while I struggled through community college working part-time at Target to pay for textbooks. She married Stephen right after graduation, a law school graduate whose family owned property downtown, while I dated Carlos for 3 years before he finally proposed on my 24th birthday. When Rebecca's twin boys were born, Mom and Dad flew to Seattle twice a year to visit, filling their social media with photos of family trips to the Space Needle and Pike Place Market. When Madison was born, they visited the hospital once and complained about the parking fees. Tyler's birth 2 years later got a similar response, brief congratulations followed by immediate comparisons to how advanced the twins were at his age. The financial support was even more obvious. Rebecca's wedding cost $18,000, paid for by Mom and Dad, with a reception at the country club and a honeymoon in Europe. My wedding was a backyard barbecue that Carlos and I paid for ourselves, using folding chairs borrowed from our church and a cake from the grocery store bakery. When Rebecca bought her first house, Mom and Dad helped with the down payment. When Carlos and I needed a loan to fix our roof after the storm damage, they suggested we talk to our bank about second mortgages. But the worst part was how they talked about my kids compared to Rebecca's boys. Marcus and Matthew were gifted, advanced for their age, destined for great things. Madison was sweet, but maybe a little too quiet for her own good. Tyler was energetic in ways that probably needed medication or therapy. Every accomplishment my kids achieved was measured against what the twins had done at that age, usually with my kids coming up short. The divorce made everything worse. Suddenly, I was the daughter who couldn't keep her marriage together, proof that I made bad decisions and needed constant oversight. Rebecca, meanwhile, was the stable one with the successful husband and the beautiful home, the daughter who had figured out how to build the life mom and dad had always wanted for their children. When I moved back home with Madison and Tyler, I thought maybe this would be a chance to rebuild relationships, to let my parents see their local grandchildren more often and appreciate who they were becoming. Instead, it became 6 months of constant comparison to Rebecca's absent but perfect twins, reminders that this living arrangement was temporary and shouldn't be too comfortable. The call about Rebecca's move came on a Tuesday evening while I was helping Tyler with his math homework at the kitchen table. Mom hung up the phone and immediately started planning room arrangements, discussing how the twins would need space for all their books and sports equipment. She never asked how Madison and Tyler felt about giving up the bedrooms they had finally started calling their own. The eviction notice came disguised as excited family news. Rebecca called during Sunday dinner to announce that Stephen's law firm was opening a branch office in our city and they would be relocating within the month. Mom started crying happy tears immediately, talking about how wonderful it would be to have the whole family close together again. The conversation about living arrangements happened that same evening, after Madison and Tyler were asleep upstairs. Mom and Dad sat me down in the living room with serious expressions, explaining that Rebecca's family would need temporary housing while they looked for the right property to buy. The guest bedroom where Madison slept would become the twins' room, and Tyler's small bedroom would be converted into Stephen's home office for his legal work. I asked where my kids were supposed to sleep during this transition period. Mom suggested the basement, which was partially finished but had no windows and smelled like mildew whenever it rained. Dad mentioned that this might be a good time for me to start looking for my own apartment anyway, since I had been saving money for several months and should be ready to live independently again. The timeline was impossible. Rebecca's family was arriving in 2 weeks, which meant Madison and Tyler needed to be somewhere else before the twins claimed their new bedrooms. 2 weeks to find an apartment, pass a credit check, gather security deposits, and move out completely. With my evening work schedule and limited savings, it felt like being asked to perform magic. But the worst part was how casually they discussed displacing my children for Rebecca's family. The twins needed space for their advanced books and educational materials. Stephen needed a proper office with good lighting for his legal documents. Madison and Tyler needed to understand that sometimes families had to make sacrifices for the greater good, and surely they would be happier in their own place anyway. When I protested that this was happening too fast, that my kids had just settled into their school routines and friendships in the neighborhood, Mom reminded me that Rebecca's children were older and their educational needs were more complex. The twins were in accelerated programs that required consistent study environments. Stephen's legal career demanded professional accommodations that wouldn't be possible with younger children running around the house. Dad added that this transition would be good for everyone in the long run. Madison and Tyler would learn independence, and I would finally take full responsibility for my own family instead of depending on parental support. Rebecca's family, meanwhile, would have the stable environment they needed during their relocation period. That night, I lay awake in the basement where my children were expected to sleep, staring at water stains on the ceiling and calculating how much money I had saved. $1,800 total, enough for security deposits on a very basic apartment, but not enough for furniture or utility connections or the dozens of other expenses that came with emergency relocations. The next morning, I dropped Madison and Tyler at school and drove to the public library to use their computers for apartment hunting. The rental market was brutal. Everything decent required first month, last month, and security deposit up front, plus application fees and background checks that would take weeks to process. The apartments I could afford were in neighborhoods with poor school ratings or safety concerns that made my stomach clench. I sat in my car outside Madison's elementary school after the library, watching other parents pick up their children, and felt something break inside me. These kids had stable homes and grandparents who treated them like treasures instead of inconveniences. Their parents weren't scrambling to find housing because family members decided their children were less important than visiting relatives. That evening, while helping Madison pack her clothes into garbage bags because we didn't have suitcases, I made a decision that surprised me with its clarity. My parents had chosen Rebecca's family over mine based on money and status, and their twisted idea of which grandchildren deserved better treatment. If they wanted to prioritize financial success and professional accomplishments, I would show them exactly what those values looked like when applied consistently. I remembered something my grandmother used to say before she died, back when I was Tyler's age and felt overlooked compared to Rebecca's constant achievements. Sometimes, Mija, the people who think they're better than you need to learn what it feels like to be on the outside looking in. Your turn will come, and when it does, you'll know exactly what to do with it. Grandma Elena had been the one person in my family who never compared me unfavorably to Rebecca, who celebrated my small victories without measuring them against anyone else's accomplishments. She had worked as a seamstress for 40 years, supporting 3 children on wages that barely covered rent and groceries, but she understood dignity in ways my parents had forgotten. The plan started forming that night as I tucked Tyler into bed in the basement, promising him we would find somewhere better to live very soon. If my parents valued financial stability and professional success above family loyalty, they were about to discover that those priorities came with consequences they hadn't considered. I wasn't going to beg or argue or try to change their minds about kicking out their own grandchildren for Rebecca's family. Instead, I was going to use their own standards against them, proving that treating people as disposable creates problems that money and status can't solve. My first step was finding temporary housing that wouldn't drain my savings immediately. I contacted Jennifer Morrison, a coworker whose husband managed rental properties downtown, and explained my situation without mentioning the family drama. Jennifer offered me a month-to-month lease on a 2-bedroom apartment above a bakery. No security deposit required if I helped clean and paint the units on my days off. The apartment smelled like bread and coffee in the mornings, with hardwood floors that creaked when Tyler ran between rooms, but it had good light and windows that opened properly. Madison and Tyler adjusted quickly, excited about living above a bakery where they could buy fresh cookies after school. The rent was manageable with my nursing assistant salary, and the month-to-month lease gave me flexibility to find something better when my savings improved. Moving out quietly was crucial to my larger plan. I wanted my parents to believe they had successfully pressured me into leaving without causing major family conflict. I thanked them for their temporary hospitality, wished Rebecca well with her relocation, and mentioned that I was looking forward to having my own space again anyway. Mom seemed relieved that I wasn't fighting the eviction, commenting that this transition would be better for everyone involved. Dad helped me load my car with the kids' belongings, mentioning that Rebecca's family would appreciate having the house to themselves during their adjustment period. Neither of them asked about our new address or offered to help with moving expenses. The next phase required patience and careful observation. I started tracking my parents' social media posts, noting how they bragged about Rebecca's return and posted photos of family dinners that obviously didn't include Madison and Tyler. They shared updates about the twins' enrollment in advanced programs and Stephen's important legal work, presenting themselves as supportive grandparents who were making sacrifices to help family members succeed. But I also noticed things they probably thought no one was paying attention to. Dad had been mentioning potential retirement plans, discussing the possibility of selling the family house and moving into something smaller and more manageable. Mom had been having health issues she tried to downplay, diabetes management that required careful diet monitoring and regular medical appointments. My parents weren't as financially secure as they pretended to be. Dad's pension from the factory would be adequate, but not generous, and Mom's part-time job at the school district wouldn't continue after her retirement next year. They were counting on Rebecca's financial stability and Stephen's legal career to provide family security they no longer had themselves. That dependency gave me leverage I decided to use strategically. If my parents valued financial success above family relationships, they needed to understand that treating some grandchildren as expendable could affect their own future security. I started documenting everything: the eviction timeline, the basement suggestion, the casual dismissal of my children's needs compared to Rebecca's family requirements. I kept screenshots of their social media posts celebrating Rebecca's return while never mentioning Madison and Tyler's displacement. Evidence that would matter later when family loyalty became a more expensive commodity than they realized. The opportunity came 6 weeks after Rebecca's family moved into my parents' house. Stephen's law firm had been investigating potential locations for their branch office, and through my connections at the hospital, I learned they were considering the downtown building where Jennifer's husband managed several commercial properties. I approached Jennifer's husband, Dave Morrison, with a business proposition. The law firm needed professional office space with conference rooms and adequate parking. The building had perfect units available, but the rent was higher than Stephen wanted to pay for a startup branch office. However, if the building owner knew about Stephen's family situation, specifically how he had displaced elderly grandparents from their own home to accommodate his housing needs, that information might affect rental negotiations. Dave listened to my explanation with growing interest. Stephen Torres Whitman was expecting preferential treatment based on his professional status, but he was essentially a temporary resident who had forced elderly family members to house his family while he looked for permanent accommodations. That kind of entitlement often indicated clients who would make unreasonable demands and create problems for property managers. Meanwhile, I had learned more about Rebecca's marriage through careful social media monitoring and conversations with mutual acquaintances. Stephen's job transfer wasn't the promotion Rebecca had described. It was actually a lateral move to save a struggling branch office that might be closed within 2 years. They weren't moving back to town from a position of strength, but because Stephen needed to prove his value to partners who were considering layoffs. The information campaign began subtly. I mentioned Rebecca's housing situation to people in our extended family network, focusing on how my elderly parents were sacrificing their own comfort to accommodate adult children who could afford their own temporary housing. I shared details about Madison and Tyler's displacement with other parents at their school, many of whom had grandparents, and understood how inappropriate the situation was. The social pressure built gradually. People started asking my parents direct questions about why they had kicked out their own grandchildren for Rebecca's family. Church members who had known Madison and Tyler from holiday services wondered why they hadn't seen the kids lately and seemed surprised to learn they had been essentially evicted to make room for visiting relatives. My parents initially defended their decision, explaining that Rebecca's family had complex needs that required stable housing arrangements. But the explanation sounded increasingly hollow when people pointed out that Stephen was a successful lawyer who could afford hotel accommodations or short-term rentals while house hunting. The breaking point came when Stephen's office lease negotiations fell through. Dave Morrison had shared concerns about Stephen's character with other property managers, describing someone who displaced elderly family members rather than paying for appropriate temporary housing. Word spread through the commercial real estate network that Stephen Torres Whitman might be difficult to work with, someone whose personal behavior suggested potential professional problems. Without suitable office space, Stephen couldn't launch the branch office effectively. The law firm partners began questioning whether he was the right person for the expansion project, especially after hearing rumors about his family situation and housing choices. Within 3 months of the move, Stephen was facing job insecurity that threatened their entire relocation plan. Rebecca called me in tears, begging me to help repair Stephen's reputation and explain to people that the housing arrangement wasn't as bad as it sounded. She insisted that staying with our parents had been temporary and necessary, not a sign of financial irresponsibility or family exploitation. I listened to her pleas with the same patience my parents had shown when I begged them to let Madison and Tyler stay in their bedrooms just a few more weeks. Then I gave her the same advice they had given me. Sometimes families have to make sacrifices for the greater good, and maybe this situation would teach everyone valuable lessons about independence and responsibility. Stephen's job situation deteriorated rapidly once his professional reputation was affected. The law firm partners decided the branch office expansion was too risky given his inability to secure appropriate commercial space and the concerns about his judgment that had reached them through professional networks. Within 6 months of moving back to town, Stephen was unemployed and Rebecca was frantically searching for work to support their family. My parents found themselves in the awkward position of housing unemployed adult children and 2 children instead of the successful family they had expected to support temporarily. Rebecca's financial contributions to household expenses disappeared, replaced by increased costs for food, utilities, and the wear and tear that 4 additional people created on their aging house. The health issues Mom had been downplaying became more serious when the stress of managing a household with 6 people exceeded her diabetic management capabilities. Dad's retirement plans were postponed indefinitely as they realized they couldn't afford to downsize while supporting Rebecca's family through Stephen's career crisis. Meanwhile, Madison and Tyler thrived in our apartment above the bakery. Madison joined the school choir and made friends with kids who lived in our neighborhood, while Tyler discovered he loved helping the bakers downstairs learn simple Spanish phrases in exchange for cookies and hot chocolate. They still saw their grandparents occasionally, but the relationship was different now, more careful, less automatic. I got promoted to senior nursing assistant at the hospital, with increased responsibilities and better pay that allowed me to move into a larger apartment with a small backyard where Tyler could play safely. Madison got her own bedroom for the first time since the divorce, with walls she could decorate however she wanted and space for all her books and art supplies. The irony wasn't lost on me that my children were happier and more stable living independently than they had been as displaced grandchildren in their grandparents' house. The eviction that was supposed to teach me about responsibility had actually demonstrated that we didn't need family members who treated us as expendable when more important relatives arrived. Rebecca and I maintained polite contact, but the easy sister relationship we'd had despite the favoritism was permanently changed. She understood now what it felt like to be the family disappointment, to have your children's needs considered less important than maintaining appearances and financial stability. 3 years later, I own a small house 2 miles from where Madison and Tyler attend school, with a mortgage I qualified for based on my steady employment and improved credit score. The kids have their own bedrooms and a backyard with a swing set Carlos helped me install last summer during one of his visitation weekends. My parents eventually sold their house on Riverside Drive and moved into a senior community apartment when Dad's health made maintaining the property too difficult. Rebecca's family rented a small duplex across town after Stephen found work with a different firm, their financial recovery slow but steady. The twins adjusted to public school and more modest circumstances, learning resilience their privileged upbringing hadn't previously required. Family gatherings are smaller now, less frequent, with an undercurrent of caution that wasn't there before. Everyone understands that loyalty and support aren't guaranteed based on blood relationships alone, that treating people as disposable creates consequences that outlast temporary housing arrangements. Madison, now 11, sometimes asks why we don't see Grandma and Grandpa as much as we used to. I tell her that families go through changes, and sometimes those changes help everyone learn what really matters. She seems satisfied with that explanation, focused on her own life and friendships rather than relationships that disappointed her when she needed them most. The basement where my children were expected to sleep is now storage space in my parents' new apartment complex. Rebecca's twins share a small bedroom in their duplex, learning to cooperate in ways their previous privilege had never required. Stephen's law career recovered eventually, but the professional connections and reputation he lost took years to rebuild. Sometimes the best revenge is simply refusing to be treated as less valuable than you actually are, than building a life that proves your worth to the people who tried to diminish it. My parents chose Rebecca's family over mine based on money and status. In the end, those same priorities left them supporting unemployed adults instead of celebrating successful grandchildren who had learned to thrive without their conditional approval.